In recent years, many organizations have begun to incorporate the use of online learning platforms in their delivery of instruction. Given this trend across multiple industries and institutions, educators and instructional designers face a dilemma: how learning and instruction should be adapted to this new medium. Practitioners in the fields of instructional design and human performance are not immune from this dilemma, as they now find new opportunities to address performance problems and skill disparities within their organizations via the use of online resources. Of course, with new opportunities come new challenges. Specifically, educators and practitioners must re-evaluate their understanding of learning and instruction in order to continue to be relevant and to provide successful instructional products and performance interventions. With new technologies must come new perspectives and methods, since the new medium of online learning and performance can introduce dynamics into the processes of learning and instruction that may have never before been considered. With this in mind, educators, as well as instructional designers and performance improvement practitioners, must evaluate the influence of new technologies and media on learning and behavior, as well as their own basic presumptions of what learning is, to identify skills and competencies needed to effect positive performance change in organizations. The human performance technology model may be used for just such an evaluation. By applying the HPT model to the task of online instruction, practitioners can identify solutions and interventions that will better equip educators for delivering effective training and instruction in the online learning environment. With more and more organizations finding their workforce spread over broad geographic regions and more businesses embracing a global rather than local marketplace, it is not surprising to discover that many essential organizational functions are making their way online. According to Bird, more and more businesses and organizations are moving towards the use of virtual teams to conduct business, with estimates that up to 50% of the American workforce would be virtual by the year 2020. Although this estimate was made prior to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020, changes that have taken hold of many industries since then have done nothing to prevent this coming to fruition. Instead, the pandemic forced many institutions to rely almost exclusively on technology to accomplish their missions and goals and keep their employees connected. In like fashion, the COVID-19 pandemic forced many schools and educational institutions to find alternatives to face-to-face instruction. This led to a dramatic increase in the use of online teaching and learning, according to Mustaku. This is not to say that the move toward online learning was precipitated only by the pandemic, since many higher education institutions have offered online degree programs for several years prior to COVID-19, and distance learning, of course, is not a new phenomenon. Additionally, the transition of many business functions to a virtual or online format has required training to adapt to the new performance environment. This has led to the far-reaching embrace of online learning across diverse industries and institutions. The online learning environment. What are the implications for traditional understandings of learning and instruction? Zing and Dahl make the case for an ontological instructional design model for use in online learning and instruction. This is juxtaposed against the traditional instructional design model, which is based more on an epistemological paradigm. A primary difference between the two is the understanding of knowledge and the relationship between different domains of learning. In the ontological paradigm, more emphasis is placed on a transactional or constructivist perspective of learning, in which students participate with each other in relating and producing knowledge. In the traditional model, on the other hand, training assumes a more instructivist perspective in which the instructor controls much of the transfer of knowledge and information. The constructivist approach allows for more individualization, more student-controlled learning. This is more conducive to the virtual learning environment, again according to Zing and Dahl. In the constructivist approach, students take a more active role in developing knowledge and guiding learning through connections and synthesis. This works better in environments where learners have more diverse experiences and differing knowledge levels, such as is seen in many online learning environments. If it is assumed that this constructivist ontological perspective of learning is more conducive to the online learning environment, what becomes of the instructor or educator's role? And how well does the traditional instructional design model work in this new setting? One aspect of the ontological model is that it espouses a holistic view of knowledge domains and learning. Rather than following the linear or formulaic methodology of traditional instructional design, such as what's seen in the ADDIE model, ontological ID assumes a more connected and open-ended model. Many individuals trained in instructional design are well prepared to provide learning and solutions to their clients and employers. But, according to Gardner et al., it is challenging for new ID practitioners to engage in real-world instructional design. This is because the field, as well as the larger world it works in, is ever-changing and new technologies are constantly emerging. A perfect example of this is the online learning environment. Many educators and instructional designers moving into the online learning environment for more traditional instructional roles face challenges related to what their role is. Given the evolving nature of instructional delivery to include more and more use of online delivery and facilitation, educators and instructional designers must develop their skills. This includes skills in new online technologies and softwares to make themselves more relevant in the current market environment, according to Giacomo et al. Educators must now learn and develop skills in using the technology itself. This includes the multiple different types of platforms used for online learning and software used to design training for online delivery. It's no longer sufficient for instructors to be able to just get along with PowerPoint alone as a means for training facilitation. Educators must constantly be learning themselves to ensure they are current and can therefore provide their clients with the most up-to-date and effective strategies and solutions that are available and appropriate. Some of this skill development includes adaptation of traditional skills to include new aspects and perspectives, according to Bird and Richardson. Bird, using leadership as an example, indicates that many concepts and skills must be examined and taught in ways that don't necessarily correspond to the way things previously have been done in the traditional learning or practical environment. Zing and Dahl, in their student-controlled approach, say that educators must develop a new teaching methodology for how they deliver online instruction. Enter the HPT model. Human Performance Technology, or HPT, is aimed at identifying and solving performance gaps in systems, according to O'Driscoll, Kang, and Melinda. Similar to the ADDIE model of instructional design, HPT is a systematic process for analyzing causes of performance gaps in organizations and coming up with interventions or solutions to address and close those gaps. HPT is a holistic methodology, meaning it looks at all possible causes and all possible solutions to deal with performance issues, even those outside the scope of training. In other words, where training may fall short of being able to solve all problems, HPT leaves nothing off the table. The end goal is measurable performance improvement of value to the organization. HPT is specifically concerned with measurable, observable data, as with any science. Rather than looking for solutions that just make sense, the HPT practitioner is concerned with empirical evidence that a proposed solution addresses an identified problem, according to O'Driscoll. Gilbert, in her discussion of the relation between traditional problem solving and HPT, points out that science is often juxtaposed against common sense. Traditional common sense approaches too often assume that additional training is the answer to every performance problem in an organization. HPT, on the other hand, and in similarity to the ontological methodology proposed by Zing and Dahl, discussed earlier, go beyond addressing issues with traditional training or motivation. In many ways, HPT and the ontological instructional design model are opposite sides of the same focus. HPT looks at the environment and the connections or the transactions to identify solutions and improvement interventions. Ontological instructional design in the online learning environment similarly proposes learning or performance improvement through connection and relationships. To illustrate how this process might be applied to the realm of online learning, an HPT model will be applied hypothetically to a national training academy which is incorporating online learning into its curriculum. Although there are various HPT models in existence, the one applied in this case will be that used by Pemberton et al., consisting of analysis, design and development, implementation and change, and evaluation. The analysis phase of HPT is much more in depth when compared to its counterpart in the ADDIE model. It involves organizational, environmental, needs, cause, and gap analysis. First, the gap must be identified. With regard to the National Training Academy, which we'll refer to going forward as the NTA, instructors need to be able to deliver instruction and facilitate learning using online tools and software, ensuring that students meet performance standards using specific knowledge and skills which are delivered virtually. At present, instructors at the NTA are very knowledgeable in classroom management learning styles, communication strategies, learning motivation, etc. However, this expertise is not translating to the virtual or online learning environment. In analyzing the organization and environment, there is little to be found in the way of formal training on online facilitation or the use of e-learning tools. The NTA began using virtual training delivery like so many other organizations during the COVID-19 pandemic, and as a result, they've been mandated by their agency leadership to continue incorporating virtual elements to save agency resources. There are a number of instructors who have had experience with online learning, and they share best practices between themselves informally. The cause for the gap in this case is the lack of training and familiarity with online instruction versus traditional classroom instruction among the NTA instructor cadre. The need is for such training, along with environmental supports such as mentoring, to help the instructor cadre deliver in online facilitation. Gaps such as this are not uncommon in the educational field as use of online instruction grows. Klein and Kelly point out that employers in the instructional design industry expect entry-level personnel to have experience with e-learning software and learning management systems, along with competence in graphic design, video production, and screencasting. Giacomo et al. Assert that novice instructional designers are not well equipped to differentiate between instructional software as necessitated by specific needs, goals, and they require, or at least desire, more on-the-job support and learning development tool competencies. This is mirrored in what's seen at the NTA. After analysis, the HPT model moves into designing and developing an intervention that will close the performance gap. Unlike instructional design models, HPT doesn't limit its scope to training, but it looks at all possible solutions. That is not to say that the problem is not training, of course. In the case of the NTA, the analysis indicated there might very well be a training component necessary in closing this gap. This phase of the model does not stop there, however. Training must be designed and developed that will effectively equip NTA instructors with the necessary skill sets to facilitate learning in the online environment. This training should address technical competencies, such as how to navigate and use necessary e-learning tools and software, how to communicate effectively in the virtual environment, and how to employ classroom management and engage students in an online setting. Beyond this, however, training should get instructors involved in talking and thinking about instruction in different ways. As Zing and Dahl point out, traditional perspectives and methodologies cease to be effective in the online environment, and by getting instructors involved in the training directly, the constructivist connected methodology may be experienced firsthand by the instructors themselves. The idea of training is proposed by Bird as virtual action learning, a method whereby the learner takes a more active role in their learning process and the role of the instructor is de-emphasized. This allows learners, in this case the NTA instructor cadre, to come together to identify specific problems and develop solutions, incorporating self-reflection, feedback, and peer support, much as the instructor's own virtual students will. Once an intervention is identified, designed, and developed to fit the needs of an organization, The next step is to implement it. This is very much an iterative process, and additional development may take place after initial implementation. In terms of the NTA, a training program such as is discussed above may be determined to spend too much time on topics or issues which are more important to the designer or practitioner and less important to the learners of the organization. Ultimately, performance improvement must be judged against the needs and valuation of the organization. Although technically the last phase of the HPT model, evaluation is an ongoing part of the process, occurring throughout. Evaluation can take place as development, design, and implementation occur, even allowing the process to return to earlier phases as necessary. Through evaluation, the practitioner, along with stakeholders, determine if the intervention was successful in closing the performance gap, if the output was worth the expense of resources for the organization, and if the intervention and processes can be applied to other similar gaps and performance issues. Data from the evaluation of the process can be hugely informative and helpful in allowing others to mimic successful results in other organizations. With regard to the NTA, evaluation should take into account feedback from the instructors/learners, from NTA leadership, and data from student performance after instructors receive the training and begin to implement it in their own online instruction. According to Richardson et al., review and evaluation should also include experts in the topical areas of the intervention. This is particularly true if the practitioner and the stakeholders are not authorities in the discipline of the intervention. In the NTA, instructors and leadership may know what they want in terms of the final or ideal performance, but they are not proficient in the competencies of online instruction. As such, they cannot make fair assessments of the quality of training provided. Data from evaluations should be provided in an iterative fashion to stakeholders and experts throughout the process in order to receive their input and incorporate it into later phases of the process. Finally, the stakeholders, in this case agency and NTA leadership, make the determination as to whether the intervention was successful based on the results of evaluation and whether the ideal performance goal was met. More and more businesses, corporations, and institutions are moving their work online, using virtual teams spread across geographic regions and different time zones, and relying on technology to stay connected to their colleagues and clients. This is a result of emerging technologies, advancements in online communication, and in response to the recent COVID-19 pandemic. No matter the impetus, traditional tasks and competencies are incorporating application in the online environment. For the professional, the challenge is whether to continue to perform tasks as always or find new and better ways of meeting their goals. This is true of the educator and instructional designer. Some things will always stay the same: concrete principles and skills, as well as solutions to common obstacles to allow the ID practitioner to engage in real-world design and instruction, as Gardner et al. Point out. Increasingly, however, the real world is actually a virtual one. Professional educators must rethink how they instruct, recognizing that the online learning environment is not as conducive to traditional instructivist methods of instruction. Rather, students benefit more from a constructivist approach, having more control over the learning experience, connecting with other students, and learning via feedback and self-reflection. In order to prepare for this new methodology, educators can use the human performance technology model to analyze their gaps in knowledge, skills, and performance, and develop interventions that successfully enable them to deliver instruction in the online environment, including competencies in new teaching methodologies and technical developments, ensuring that their students are better prepared to perform at the most desirable level.